So this presentation came from a couple of articles that were sent into TechCrunch that propose a different perspective. If you think about technology and the way that we're talking about it today, it's very off-putting to the mass market. And the mass market for IoT is actually everybody, the consumers from every part of the globe, every walk of life. And the challenge with that is they're not technologists, they're not the people that are here at this show. They've come from everywhere. And right now, this is how they feel. They can walk into a retail store and see product A that's a light bulb and product B that's a light bulb and have to have different apps to control those two different light bulbs. It's a really confusing experience. On top of that, if they were to search and say, hey, what is IoT? They go online, they Google it, and here's what comes up. Word clouds that have lots of words that some are made up that are really confusing. But what's it look like? Picture's worth 1,000 words. What's that look like? The tube map or wrapping paper from 1974. These are images that are actually used to depict what IoT is to the mass market. And it gets worse. This is actually an industry logo that takes an airplane, a telephone, gear, and a light bulb and connect them together. It's really confusing what we're actually trying to achieve with technology. So the idea here is that we need to change the story because we're not all on the same page. For example, this particular image depicts a network with a cat. So everybody's got a different image of what IoT means and what this does. So I think it's time to actually tell a different story. Let's change the message. Let's start with the things that are in the world and interpret how we can bring those into people's homes. First off, understand they have stories to tell. So if a thing has a story to tell, perhaps you can imagine the thing as a person. And if you can imagine the thing as a person, you might be able to imagine them actually having their own voices, their own attitudes, their own personalities. And it's really interesting because you can imagine a device that works in the business of fire speaking with that kind of a tone, or something works in lighting and having that kind. And I say the word works because it's important. If they're people, maybe they're employees. And maybe you're actually in charge of that company. So imagine the things in your life are actually employed by you and they work for you. You're not the CTO. You don't want to be the technical guy to oversee this. You'd much rather be the CEO of your life so you can feel like this guy. Everything just works for you. I just came out of a Nest presentation and they're exactly right. These things have their own personalities, have their own ability to make decisions, and that's a good thing. Imagine, for example, this scenario. That's currently the CTO of the home, but he wants to be the CEO of his life. He's not happy being CTO. He's not good at being CTO. And sometimes he fails at being CTO. So perhaps technology can help solve this problem. Imagine bringing in a manager for all the devices he has. He bought a bunch of connected devices from the store. He brought them home. They don't really work together. And he's realizing the error of his ways. Luckily, there's things that can help him. Other things that can actually be managers. For example, a bridge or a gateway in the home that can actually take the burden of translating and communicating between devices and to make things easier. So now with this understanding that these things work for you, they're employees in your life, the manager is going to take command. And like any good company, it's a well-oiled machine. Everything has a job to do, a task to perform, and they all do it exactly the right way, right? Not every time. So a manager also has to manage the exclusions. Plus you have gossip in the workplace. So now we've imbued personality to these devices. We've created this company that works for me. And the reason this is important is because it gives us the ability to actually think completely differently about technology. And we'll go in detail about that after he becomes the CEO of his home. That's the CEO. He's happy. And it's not just his home. A lot of homes can come online and become their own things. So what we're suggesting is shift your perspective. Think about it differently. So let's go to school and learn about some things we just saw here. First thing, let's take a class. Psych 101, for people. In psychology, really, the late 1800s to the 1900s, a huge number of advances were made. There was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Sigmund Freud who decided that the way that people interact in society is flawed, and it actually needs to be analyzed, and you got to figure out what's going on there. So he kind of had a dark tone to how to handle science. But then it came along a couple of years later, this guy, happy guy, look at that smile. This is Dr. Abraham Maslow. Maslow suggested that actually people are good, and they need to realize their actual potential. So he presented this idea of a hierarchy of needs. Basic ideas here is it's building blocks. If, for example, you don't have your psychological or physiological needs met, you don't live in a house that's happy and warm, you're not going to want to worry about the next level up. You're not going to want to worry about your esteem if you can't feed yourself. And this went a long way, and a lot of companies and people use this to understand the human psyche and how people interact. So let's take that and reimagine it for things, if we consider them as people. Breaking down the 3 layers of self-existence, self-expression, and self-actualization. So now we're doing Psych 101 for things. Start with the building blocks. Self-existence. What does a thing need to exist? First thing it needs is physical needs. It needs power. It needs some physical connectivity, whether it's a wireless connection or a wired connection or whatever. It also needs value. And this is a really important piece that people forget. For us to create a thing, there needs to be a need for that thing. That need could be one person or it could be a company, but that's a really important thing about IoT is things are created because somebody needs them. On top of that, it's got to be secure. If something in this world is hackable, it's going to be hacked, especially as more things come online. So security is a basic requirement for self-existence of IoT things. Go up the next level, self-expression. For something to actually share its information and tell a story, what's it need? Well, it requires some form of language. Connectivity needs in form of protocol or one of these many standards that are out there. It's got to have something like that. It also has something to say. So it needs data, and it needs a model, and it needs to be able to present its information in a way that other technology understands the story. Once it has that self-expression, then the next level is it has the ability to self-actualize. Now, while this is important to understand that some things may have this all-inclusive self-actualization all the way to self-existence, many won't. So when you think about things, don't just think about it as that thermostat on the wall, and don't just think about it as that sensor. Think about a thing as a distributed piece of intelligence, where the cloud actually may bring self-actualization to a thing. And actually, let's talk about this for a second. Dr. Maslow, Dr. Freud, those are really notable doctors. There's another doctor I want to bring to mind. This doctor is one of my favorites. Theodore Seisel, anybody know who he is? Dr. Seuss, a thing is a thing no matter how small. So when you think about a thing, it could be a sensor, but if you combine sensors together, it forms a network or in this case, a security system. That's also a thing. All of this thinking applies to that as well. And go to the next level. You take systems together and you get a house. You take houses together and you get a neighborhood. These each are things and can be interacted and thought about that way. Now, why are we doing all this? We're doing all this for a simple change of the message. And that is, instead of objectifying people, which we've heard in different sessions is wrong, maybe we can peopleify things. So if we do that, what's that look like? Well, if we're talking about employees at a company, perhaps we can use a lot of the paradigms that exist. For example, things can collaborate. They can work together to solve problems. Things can actually lead other things so that they can work together as a team with a manager on top of it. Things can have agreement. They can have contracts between them so that they can do what they need to do without intervention. Also think about they need to listen to the CEO. You're going to be happy like that guy as the CEO of your life. You're going to need your things to actually listen to you when you want them to talk. And anybody who's been in any of these robot sessions realizes that's really important to be able to stop them from doing what they shouldn't be doing and listen to you. So let's break that down to the company and really dig into it. When you hire somebody into a company, there's certain things before you bring them in to your system that you're going to check. Questions that you're going to ask things are similar. Do you trust it? First thing you're going to ask before you bring something home is, do you trust it? And trust is a very, very big word, but from a technology perspective, you also need to trust it to do the job you need. Can it do what you're bringing it to do? Can it do the tasks? And most importantly, does it work well with others? That's where a lot of technology falls down. Let's carry that paradigm a little further. If things were people, perhaps we could interact with them in the same paradigms, the same way we do with our friends. Why can't we email things? Why can't we tweet to things or send Facebook messages to things? Why can't we SMS or simply talk to a thing? Well, we're starting to be able to. But the thinking of the people who make the things and the networks and the connectivity needs to shift to require this, not an app, right? We've got app exhaustion from all the devices that are coming online. The suggestion is simply, we need to think about technology coming to us, not the other way around. And for mass consumer adoption, that's required. It has to weave into our lives versus us having to add it on. And adding on includes, oh, here's company A, and they have an app, and I can control that thing or a couple of things. But if I want to get the other thing that's like those things, I have to get another app, and another, and another. The projected numbers that they actually have for the number of apps that will come online for the IoT growth that everybody talks about, over 2 million. So it's going to become the same problem we have in the living room with remote control on steroids. It's going to be huge problems with too many remote controls, too many apps to control things. So we have to think about it now, how we bring that up a level. Let's go further. The output, how do they share information with us? Shouldn't they be able to share information as an image? Why can't they create an infogram for me on a weekly basis as a summary of everything that they have to tell me? Why can't I use the same calendar and scheduling that I use with all my other technology? And the suggestion is, you can. The problem that we have today, for example, if I get a thermostat application, the thermostat company has decided to reimagine the calendar for me, as has the lighting company, as has all these other guys that started in garages and didn't really spend all the time that the other calendar people have. I want these things to weave into my life. I don't want to have to learn all these new paradigms. So the idea here is, let's reimagine these things so that we can think about that. And what's really great, if they work for you and they're in your company, then you can actually do things like optimize your workforce. That lamp we saw in the video that didn't work, fire it. There's different devices that work together really well. For example, the coffee pot and the smoke detector are both in the business of fire. So perhaps they should be grouped together. They should be tagged together. Hey, I do that already. I tag my friends. I put them into groups, or in some cases into circles, so that I have a relevance that I can create with the group of things that I care about. So everything that's outside should behave a certain way, or everything that's in the business of fire should work together. This is the simple idea. I can reorganize my things in a way that makes sense to me. Try to do that with apps today. And finally, I can also bring new sexy technology in very easily to actually do what I want. So this is the direction that we're in today. What's it look like as we go forward? What's the future hold for things? Let's look at it. Reputation. Things will have their own reputations. Things will have their own kind of Yelp. Not only will things be able to advise things, but people will be able to advise things. We've seen that within social media. We've seen that within technology like Uber. That recommendation, that self-checking feature is huge and will continue to be important as people trust and try to get trust in devices. Contracts, they're already happening. We're already seeing it. Is this agreement between devices to actually engage? Well, with contracts, maybe you have disputes. Maybe you actually have things with attitudes, like those robots that we're seeing. I hope they don't have attitude. And if you want to just kind of go a little bit further, what if things actually create their own romance connections? Like this. That new lamp is causing problems. And all the technology works together, including the stereo. So, what are we talking about here? This is specifically aimed at stakeholders. The stakeholders who make things. You need to shift your perspective. When you change the way you see your world, this is a fantastic quote from Microsoft, you can change the world you see. Really what we want to do here is we want to shift a collective perspective to think about things a little differently. And the reason for stakeholders like people who make things is they need to understand the fundamentals. And the fundamentals, if you make a thing, is that thing has to be trustworthy. You got to trust it to interoperate. You have to trust it to protect information, protect privacy, and trust it to do its job. So if you make a thing and you can't answer those questions, if you can't make a hireable thing that you would bring into a company, then you're going to have some problems with the direction that IoT is going. If you create interactions, if you make apps, if you are working with the communication of things, what should you think about? Well, you should think about using existing paradigms, time-based paradigms, social-based paradigms, be able to actually use storage mechanisms and all the things that we do in our lives to actually make our lives easier. We could use at least those paradigms with things and have the things use those same interactions. So definitely consider what exists today that over 1 billion of people understand versus what you're sitting in your garage and saying, oh, I'm going to create this brand new way to interact with technology and people will love it. If you're a decision maker, if you're a CEO and you want to bring something into your company, right? You want to be happy like this guy. Understand a couple of things. And decision makers are not just in the home. They're decision makers in the business. They're decision makers in decisions about IoT. Well, if you're making a decision, you're in charge of the money. So make the decision that you would make if the money was yours. You have the right to hire it. You have the right to fire it. And don't forget that. If something doesn't do the job, reject it, because that ties back to the reputation. That ties back to the self-checking feature that helps the entire system rise and the failures fail. And be able to organize it, be able to tag things, be able to assign relevance to the things. You have to do that. You have to demand the ability to do that. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck where you get product A, product B, product C from these companies, and they're all going to be different. So remember that you're in charge and that you're the CEO. That's the most important takeaway if you're making decisions and if you make platforms. And there's lots of companies that make platforms, but understand the paramounts of making a platform because you're in the trusted position. Got to be secure. Absolutely got to be secure. Not because it's the right thing to do. That's a good reason to, but because of liabilities. Entire new law firms are going to spin up and law segments are going to spin up around IoT, privacy, and failure, and many will fail. You don't want to be in that boat. Make sure it's scalable. You've seen the numbers. Some believe them. I actually think they're way low from where actually it's going to happen. These numbers indicate that a lot of things are going to come online with the voice, and they're going to be really chatty. It's got to be scalable. It's also got to be modular. You got to be able to add to it because customers are going to use your platform. They're going to want the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. It has to be able to grow. So always keep in mind that you're not building the siloed applications of yesterday. You're building modular applications. And you need some way to actually verify and validate the things that go into the ecosystem. Never lose sight of that. So that's actually what we do. We build trusted, interoperable, secure, and scalable solutions for IoT. And that wraps it up for me. Not sure what side. This is what we do. There's a little pitch. But if you guys want to follow on Twitter, I'm the IoT Guru. And if you scan the code, that's the LinkedIn profile. So thanks a lot, and enjoy the rest of your evening.